My name is Alessandra Moctezuma, and I'm the gallery director here at Mesa College. And I thank you all for joining us this evening for a lecture by artist Alexander Lee. I also want to make a couple of announcements. One is that we actually will have a closing performance that is also part of this exhibition. It will be a modern opera where Polynesian topics will be brought in to include Hawaiian story of Pele, the goddess of fire. The gallery installation will serve as a backdrop, and the performance will combine experimental music by Keith Moore and contributions by underwater performer Juliana Snapper and the dance troupe Halau Hula o Malulani under the direction of Kumu Hula Kapena Malulani Paris. And I want to thank Pianta for helping us coordinate that effort. I'm very glad to welcome you. I hope that you enjoyed the wonderful exhibition. I'll tell you a little bit about Alexander Lee. He was born in Stockton, California. He grew up in Tahiti, French Polynesia. He attended the School of Visual Arts in New York City, and then he received his MFA from Columbia University in 2002 and an MPS from the Interactive Telecommunications Program at NYU in 2003. He currently lives and works in New York. Alexander Lee had his first solo exhibition, The Departure of the Fish, in 2006 at the Kincaid Contemporary Gallery in Los Angeles, and he's continued to explore the theme of the creation myth of Tahiti in exhibitions in Los Angeles and New York. But I also want to mention that it's very special for us to actually have Alexander Lee exhibiting in our gallery because he is family. He actually attended Mesa College in the 1990s, from 1993 to 1997. And so when he came back, he met many familiar faces of professors who had taught him. Robert Sanchez, Barbara Sexton, Jeannie Schenk, Lynn Engstrom, Georgia Laris, Beata Bermanen, Barbara Blackman, and so many of his instructors are now seeing him as an emerging artist who is showing internationally, and that made it all the more special to have him come back to our college. I also want to say that this experience of the exhibition was unique for us in that it was really a learning process for our students. I teach the museum studies class here at the college, and so my students usually help put together the exhibitions that we offer. But this was particularly special because Alex actually recruited artists from many different classes to help in the process of creating this exhibition. So students helped paint the murals that you see on the walls, and they helped cast the pieces that you see resting on the black sand. And through all this, they learned about hard work and all that it takes, and a creative process that is constantly changing and evolving, and about having flexibility and accepting things. And also, I think because we realized that some of those murals will disappear after this show, we also learned that artists, about the process and the gift that we give people, about the beauty that we experience when we see it, but also the effort that we all put in to making it. So I want to thank Alex for bringing that wonderful opportunity to our students, for letting them participate in this. I also want to thank, of course, everybody that made this possible. We have a long list in front of the gallery. We gathered this afternoon to make sure that we didn't miss any names, but I'm sure that we might have forgotten a few. But I want to thank all of the instructors that brought us their students. I want to thank all of the students. I want to thank the staff here at the college. Our dean, Jonathan Foreman, is here today. Our chair, Georgia Laris, I don't know if she's here. And my guest and all the wonderful team that we have here at the college that helps us get things done. And of course, I want to thank my gallery assistant, Pat Vine. She was here throughout the summer helping put this together. And she made sure that Alex had a big welcoming hug when he came in the door. And she helped coordinate all of these efforts too. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Alexander Lee to tell us about this magical exhibition.
It's so amazing to be here. Thanks, guys. And you know, I can't even I can't look at you without having a big smile on my face because we spent so much time in there. And but it's really been amazing, Alessandra, to be here. And thank you for having me. You know, thank you for Georgia Laris, Barbara Sexton. I'm a little bit, wow. Dean Foreman, like everybody was so welcoming, and it was so good to sort of come back and find familiar faces here again. And like starting an exhibition is always a little bit scary because you know, you always sort of like get into the unknown and you're trying to make something that you've never made before, and to sort of know that you have people who are gonna like take your hand at 3 in the morning and be like, okay, like let's like finish this, you know. Or this morning at 5:15 with Patty, where we're like, okay, we need another 20 minutes to just get that shading just right, you know. And yeah, and thank you so much, you know. All right. So after all this, I'm just gonna try to unpack, you know, like what's in there, but also maybe give you a little bit of my exhibition history so that maybe you can follow these pieces as they evolve and maybe understand the process just a little bit more for the ones who sort of, you know, took part of this and maybe might not have had the bigger picture, but were sort of looking at that square and trying to figure out where the darks were and where their shadows and lights were and why they were spending 2 hours doing that. I grew up in Tahiti, and there's a story, it's an oral tradition of it. It used to be an oral tradition. It's now a French territory, and it has been for 100 or so years. I found this story again in this book by Tewira Henry, that was part of the Bishop Museum. The stories were collected, part of the book that was published by the Bishop Museum in Hawaii. And it talks about this odyssey of this fish that transformed into the island of Tahiti. And so the story goes that, so this is Tahiti right here, and there's an island here called Reiatea. And traditionally that island's name was Hawaii, which is the mythical place for where Polynesian civilization sort of started. From there they sort of radiated over the Pacific to the Marquesas, the Tuamotu, the archipelagos, and further north to the islands of Hawaii, and east to Easter Island, and the Maoris in New Zealand, and so forth. But of particular interest is this island of Reiatea and Ta'a right next to it, because the story talks about how this place, Hawaii, was the seat of the gods, and there was festivities for the gods where nobody could talk or make any movement and move, or not movements, but they couldn't sort of, they had to sort of stay in and pray to the gods. But this young girl called Terehe wanted to run out and play in the water. So she goes out and swims in the water, freshens up, gets discovered by the god, and they paralyze her to punish her. And so she drowns, and from the bottom of this river, this giant eel comes up, so the story says, and swallows her whole. So all of a sudden you have this giant eel possessed by the spirit of this girl that's splashing around, first in the water, then on land. It's causing this whole ruckus, and it's splitting the island in half. And so the island of Hawaii now becomes Reatea, and its isthmus broken off, which is Taha right here. This fish, possessed by the spirit of this girl, starts to swim, to drift on water, and melts with the pieces of the broken island. It transforms into a fish, swims east, and becomes the island of Tahiti, which is right here, and it's the biggest island in the entire territories, and that's what it looks like in the exhibition, or a new version of that particular piece. The stories sort of talk about Tahiti as this fish, and so the head being in this area, and the body around here, and each river, and it talks about the different parts of the fish as incorporated in the geography, geology of the island. There it is. Well, this is Mehetia, which is, let me show it to you on the map. This is Tahiti right here. This is Mehetia. And the story talks about how Mehetia is the oral excrement of the fish. You have Morea here, which is the dorsal fin that broke off in its wake. Mai'o, which is a little claw, and Tetiaroa up here, which is the anal excrement of the fish. So out of these, very colorful stories, you also have like a way of explaining these geological formations in the area. So this is Mehetia, the oral excrement of the fish, and it's about 3 miles away from Tahiti, and it's a deserted island except for a flock of goats. But it's the youngest volcano in the area. And I found out doing this research that it was on sale for 15 million euros. So I'm thinking about maybe starting a list so that if we all pitch in €1, we could all own it collectively and hang out with the goats. And we could either double or triple our investment if the volcano erupts, or we can completely lose it. But for €1, we can take the risk, right?
Yeah.
Who wants to take on that project? So there it is in the middle of the ocean. Isn't it a beauty? A friend of mine is a scuba diver, and he was telling me about his friend who they actually did an excursion of the island. And there's no really any coral reef, so it's really in the deep blue, and you sort of go with your tents and water and everything. There are underground wells, but they didn't really have the means to do that in 5 days because they were just going for scuba diving. So they pitched a tent and everything, and they said that they saw a goat sort of tumble down the ravine into the ocean, and within minutes, some tiger shark just picked it up like that. So there's island living for you. That's a drawing I made out of these images doing research. Oh yeah, we could also build like crazy sculptures on that island, anything we ever want. So growing up there, you watch the ocean a lot. You look at fish, you look at sports fishing. I found this image online, but I always sort of thought it was interesting how it's an ecology unto itself too, and we eat each other up, literally or not, and that's sort of like like these little facts of life that you sort of like stumble upon when you're doing research, and you sort of and also thinking about as an art practice what you're really making and what for and how and why, and thinking about your audience, what sort of like just triggers people, and all of these images of like sports fishing are pretty incredible. I mean, do you think we can ever find a fish like that again? I really want to know where he got his boots. I So I go home and do research in Tahiti, and I go dumpster diving, and this is in the fish market, and these things that I find, and so these fish heads were cast, and they were actually in some of the sculptures in the exhibition. That's going to be a long little side note, but it's worth it because it's kind of fun. In '77, there's this movie that came out called Airport '77. It was with Jack Lemmon and who else was in there? Let me look at my notes. Lee Grant. Oh, it's all in there. George Kennedy. Hey, Shane Stewart. And it's about this. It's basically the story of the Titanic, but with Vic 747. They all get on their airplane, and it just crashes underwater, and they're stuck in there. And half of the people want to go out from the tail, and the other half want to go out from the front, and they sort of fight over it. And there are terrorists in there who are still trying to overtake everything, even though they're underwater. It's really fun. It's funny, but I think it's also sort of interesting because within the scope of trying to think about how we aestheticize things and how we try to talk about our society, our civilization, and what sort of triggers us. It's pretty amazing. These movies also came out at the same time that there were a lot of airplane hijackings in the 70s. So these sort of catastrophe airplane movies were on vogue. This one was one of the sort of more, I don't know how much it grossed. I know someone in this room who knows how much that movie grossed. Moving right along. So that's just a still image during production. But then, so I remember seeing this movie being, a kid in Tahiti, and we're sort of crazy about airplanes, and but we went to Universal Studios maybe in the 80s, and they had this live performance and it was part of the attractions, where you could be part of. You were in the audience. But they would actually reenact the entire movie, on stage. It was like going to see the dolphins jump, live. But that was on University, and that was about that movie. So you had the audience here, and they asked, they had this water tank to sort of, fake, the water scenes, and they asked people for the audience to participate in it. And sort of remember being sort of fascinated by it, the fact that we not only make a movie out of this, but then we're actually sort of players in it, and it's an attraction. You pay to go and have fun and do this. And I'm not saying this in a negative way. I just think this is completely fascinating that we can do that, and we do it. So these images are actually part. I got them online, but they're. From the archives of Universal Studios. They have a whole archive of the kind of attractions that they've had over the years. Wow. So there you go. And of course, it's a set, right? So you have the cockpit on this side, you have the news crew on this other, you have the first class lounge in the middle, and the water tank on this side, and it's sort of, a little bit cubist, and, and you have cameras rolling and people shouting, and I also wanted to talk about this, part of this whole thing about the fascination with airplanes and how one can sort of make stories in their head out of, especially being kids. There was an airplane crash in '73. Pan Am sort of took off from Tahiti airport, and 40 seconds after takeoff, it crashed in the ocean, and we never found the black box because it got carried away in strong currents, and it was really deep, and they didn't really have the resources to dig it out anyway at the time. There's one survivor who passed away a year later. It was sort of one of these weird accidents that, they try to cover it up or not really talk about it. One of my best friends in high school lost her 2 brothers on that crash. And it's sort of was this weird thing where they would always talk about it. Whenever we'd go to dinner at their place, for example, there would always be a mention of, those 2 kids. And that sort of like melted into, you know, my brain with this thing about airplanes and how cool it would be to like see an airplane crash in front of, you know, your house, like by the beach, because then you can really go and save them, and you know, like sort of creating all these different narratives of these crash things. But then there will also be stories about fishermen finding body parts in, you know, sharks, like, you know, like sometime after the event. So just, you know, sort of throwing these out to you in terms of like thinking about the body. And so this first exhibition at Kincaid in 2006, I want to sort of think about these stories and these images as more of a panorama, and I'm just going to run through these so that you have this sort of blue platform and this rest on them, and you have this volcanic sort of eruption here. And then 6 months later, I had an exhibition in New York, and I sort of wanted to retell that story again. And I call it Redux. I sort of like, by that time I had sort of like figured out, you know, I was really sort of like better at making these sculptures. They're cast in resin and black sand. And, you know, some newer elements sort of came out. And I sort of like that idea that I was sort of, you know, talking about narrative and making narrative sculptures, that there could be an element of film in this whole sculptural art making process that that you could follow in between exhibitions, and hopefully you'll see that thread, you know, between them. So that the first one was in LA was on a smaller scale, and then this one, you know, is sort of like takes on another dimension. It's about 2,500 square feet. There's a movie by I forget his name. Has anyone seen that movie, the Beaver trilogy? No, it's this filmmaker who had this. What did he do? He was testing a camera. He was a camera operator. He was testing a camera in Hollywood sometime, and this kid comes up to him and said, "Hey, you're like holding a camera. You should film me." And you know, and the guy was just testing a camera. He's like, "Okay," you know, and nothing really happens from this. But he gives this guy his phone number, and later the teenager sort of calls him and said, "Oh, we're having our talent show at our high school. You should come out and film it." And he was in between jobs, so he thought this could be interesting. So he goes out and films a talent show. And it turns out that the kid had sort of like put the whole show together by himself, just to be on camera, you know, just to be part of the show. And that, and he also used it as a way to come out, because he did like with his rock band, they started playing Xanadu, and he came out in full drag, and everybody was totally shocked. So this filmmaker had this footage, this raw footage of, you know, just seeing that kid, you know, on the parking lot, and then this whole sort of little event, weird event of that. And so the trilogy of the movies that he has, the first small short is just the raw footage of the movie, of what he shot when he first met the kid, and then he rewrote the whole thing and made it into a narrative film where Crispin Glover was playing the lead character, and then the third you know, part of the trilogy is exactly the same thing, but he gets better and he edits more, and it's Sean Penn playing the lead. And you see it as, you know, it's about 2 hours, all three at the same time. But it's interesting because you see the editing process that happens, and this sort of like the way the story actually becomes, you know, out of this real life event, it sort of like transforms into this piece of fiction, and you know, and a real sort of like more formal like Hollywood story, I guess. I think that whole thing about trying to remake an exhibition, the same exhibition but different, was sort of like came out of that idea of trying to revisit what you're doing between, you know, between takes or something, or a little bit later. So those are just images of that second exhibition in New York, the Redux version. So there's the eel possessed by the spirit of Terehe. And the same eel possessed by the spirit of Terehe, but this one is a corpse. In the process of making these molds, this is my Terehe paralyzed in her swim. In the process of making these molds, I end up I either go back to Tahiti or I go dumpster diving and whatever, and it's always kind of fun because I'm also making other stories, like something always happens and it's fun and it's funny. For this eel, I went out. The show was offered to me in January and it was opening in April, so I had about 3 months between to sort of really make it happen. And I felt like I needed more molds and more models to really flush out a lot of these images and pieces. So I went to Tahiti for 10 days and my friends still live there. And got a hold of a fisherman who was helping me, and we're going to try to go out and catch a big fish. And we went out and the weather was flat, like everything was flat, nothing was biting. So I was there 10 days and I needed 4 or 5 days to make all the molds. I also had other things I had to mold up before I left to New York. And then the last day of the fishing trips, we still hadn't, it was the last day, we hadn't caught anything so far and we're just baiting. And out of nowhere this giant eel came up. And it was, we weren't in really shallow waters, like about maybe 7 feet, water. And this 5 feet eel came up, and you could tell that it really came from deep. And he was sort of twirling around on itself and coming closer to the boat and twirling and coming closer. And the fisherman said, "Oh, do you want that? There's an eel. Do you want it?" And I sort of instantly looked at it, and I kind of went, "Yeah," a little bit shocked and in awe at the same time. And that eel actually looked like a drawing I had made 6 months before, and it was a drawing of an eel with a woman's hand, which is. So we caught it, and I made 3 molds of it. And by this third time, the mold, I'm making molds outside, so by the 3rd day of mold making, the eel had completely swollen up and it was ready to burst. And this is the 3rd mold, so it looks bigger and more puffy. But I also have a friend, I'm telling you the story because I think it's sort of important in the process of making this work. I have a friend who works for the traditions department in the museum in Tahiti. And she's a little bit of a shaman. Her job it's a pretty cool job. She goes out, she researches specific stories or either legends or specific symbols. So it would be either a fruit, a fish, anything. And she'll go and research, she'll just go onto the island and interview everyone, the elders, and write everything down. And then she'll gather up all the kids and the younger, younger kids, and try to recreate this whole ritual with them. And so it becomes a way for them to also sort of freshen up the blood and in this sort of tradition making, I guess, if you want to call it that way. And so she'll tell me stories way back when they didn't have phones or satellites, so she just landed on an island. Unexpectedly, people there wouldn't expect her, and she would just go around the island and talk to people. And this one woman she went to said, and she introduced herself, and the woman said, "Oh yeah, you're the woman I was waiting for you. You're this woman." And she said, "How do you know that how do you know that I was coming? There's no phone, nothing." And the woman would tell her "Oh, it's because the crickets sang differently this morning." So it's kind of amazing, but it's I don't know how else to explain it. But there's such a different way, I guess, that you could sort of relate to the world and still get your information. I don't know how else to formalize it, but I think it's it's sort of part of my practice where it always amazes me when things like that happen, and I think. Hopefully it happened for you guys while we're doing it, because I felt something happened. We had this show up So I go back and whenever I have a question about something, I always a motif or something in the work. I'm just gonna roll through this as I'm finishing the story. I always sort of run it by her, or I sort of pick her brains about something, and so I asked her about. I told her about this eel that I had found, and she said, "What did you do with it after your mold making?" And I said, "Well, I actually buried it in my parents' house. The northernmost point of their property that was sort of facing New York, which is where I live. And I made a hole in it and I buried it in this position of sort of coil onto itself, like a snake coil onto itself and the head up like this." And she was sort of like intrigued and she's like, "Why did you put it in that position?" And I said, "It's because that's sort of how it appeared to me, the eel in the water." And she said, "Oh, that's interesting because we say that position is the position of the eel when it's getting ready to make a project, when it's getting ready for a job or something, it's sort of coiled up in it." And I thought it was pretty fitting. So anyway, like things like that happen, and I think they're kind of, I don't know how to, I just like to tell the stories. Just like she likes to tell me stories like that. So that was New York. And then last year I had another show at John's in LA, John Kincaid, who's here. Hi, John. So for that third exhibition, I was interested in this passage and the story that talked about the great fish changing skies, and it sort of fascinated. Like, first, it was just a beautiful image, and then I was sort of curious about it. So I went back to my friend Tutana in Tahiti, and I said, "What do you think that is? Like, what is it? What's your take on it?" And she said, "Well, two things come to mind. One is that everything that is in the sky is also on the ground, and vice versa, everything that's on the ground is in the sky." And my sort of way of imagining it is, that moment at sunset when the water gets really oily and it really reflects the sky above, and vice versa. I mean, that image being maybe one a good example of it. And so I was really fascinated by this idea of, this mirror collapsing image of some sort. The Rose by Jay DeFeo. She made it in her apartment in San Francisco, and it's a painting, but it's so thick that it's like 128 inches by 92 or something. It's super thick, super heavy, and they actually had to like cut the window out of her apartment and sort of like take the painting out. I saw, I think the Whitney, she made a lot of these too, but this one is the one that I think they had to pry out of her apartment. Bruce Conner made this little 16mm film out of the whole process when they opened up her apartment to take it off. I'm going to show you these, but I also should introduce them. So part of this whole great fish changing sky, Tutana was also talking to me about in '96, Hawaiian navigators wanted to do the reverse trip from Hawaii back to Tahiti, and so they went out and got these giant logs in New Zealand, chopped out those trees and sort of like recarved those big outriggers out of them. And so there were 10 boats, and boat number 4 was late, like it was 4 days late. So they got really scared, and they started to make these rituals to sort of like try to bring the boat back to land. And when the boat finally arrived, they asked the shaman on board what had happened, and the shaman said, "Oh, it's because." Well, he didn't say. The shaman said we were sailing, and in the middle of it, our guide in the sky sort of like turned around and went back to Hawaii, and so we got lost at sea. And my friend was just like in pure Tahitian language, so she's like, "Oh yeah, of course, like they didn't do the ritual properly, And basically it was that the shaman on board was supposed to sort of like call on to the spirits of the land where they were going to send their own guides to sort of like pick up, midway or something. So I thought that was pretty cool. I mean, that they had this sort of, aeronautical navigation system or something. You didn't need people in control towers. You can just call on them. But you had to call on them, otherwise you get lost at sea. This little rock here is actually where I made that mold of those tectonic plates that are sitting in the gallery. This cove, this sort of cove here is the Matavai Cove, and it's where the mutinies of the Bounty actually took place. The whole story of the Bounty and the movie with Marlon Brando in the 70s got filmed. There was another version in '86 with Mel Gibson. But it was an earlier version with Errol Flint in the 30s. Y'all did it. And this is just another cool rock. It's on the northern coast of Tahiti. July 3rd, 1970. It's an image of a nuclear test that France did in the Tuamotu Islands in French Polynesia. And I used that cloud as a model for one of the paintings, the wall drawings in the exhibition. It's really fun. You can ask Patty. It was really fun to like try to match these colors at 3 in the morning. Like, oh yeah. I think like this shadow here should really like roll in and like engulf the whale. Such an amazing image at the same time that it's so horrifying. And, all right, so for the exhibition at Kincaid last year, I really wanted to try to collapse these two images of the volcanic eruption, the actual geological formation of this island, and these mushroom explosions, these nuclear explosions. Because I sort of felt there was something there, like one being obviously the formation of the island itself, but then I think in a more in a different level, like these when France started to do their nuclear program there, they brought in the entire military infrastructure, what we call the military industrial complex. And it really sort of like made a big economic boom in the islands, because then all of a sudden all the contractors were catering to the military, and it's really touched everybody on the islands. You could rent your apartment higher to people from the military than local people because they had the money to pay for it, and they had bonuses and whatnot. So I think for better or worse, like it really impacted the population solution in a really phenomenal way. So I thought it was interesting to sort of pair these two events, a new sort of like rebirth into modernity of some sort. And so these are more of these celestial stars. Actually, just to backtrack real quick, these crazy shapes that I made in 3D, or sort of like these drawings that I wanted to sort of play with in terms of these celestial stars in the sky that are supposed to like guide you all the way to land. But also I was sort of like thinking about this idea of like navigation when you just had a roadmap in the skies, and not really know what, like this era of discovery where you just go out and try to figure out what goes on, and you lose and you get lost and you find yourself or you die. I always feel like it was this leap of faith, and that maybe in our contemporary times it's a little bit like thinking about aliens and life in other planets and whatnot. So I wanted to have that shade being a little bit more inorganic and maybe more straight edged and science fiction like next to these very organic things. So this is what happened in LA last year, and I actually reuse a lot of these parts for the exhibition here. So these tectonic plates here are the same ones that are actually in the gallery, same than these, except that we didn't recreate the mushroom cloud because I kind of wanted to make that piece into a new one. I've always been fascinated by the way they like plug these rods into the earth, like they go in Antarctica or something and just make levels of earth or something so that they can study sedimentation. And so that was sort of my take on it, like that these plugs were like, sort of like drilled into this body of the fish that's the island and sort of like pulled out, but then this, this like blue spirit sort of came out at the same time. Now it's maybe a little bit new agey for me. So this is probably a good place to start with the story again. So this girl, becomes an island. But as I'm doing research, I'm also finding out that there are other stories that sort of follow this creation of the island of Tahiti, which is that when the fish got in its place and that people start inhabited it. Well, there's another subsequent story to the creation of the island, which is that it talks about how the fish was unstable and that the priest at Opoa on the previous island had to go out, and so they sent out these warriors to cut the sinews of the fish and sort of tie it into place. And as I'm doing more research, of course, I'm trying to reconstruct. I'm reconstructing a different version of the story, which is a little bit more historical and anthropological, and it talks about maybe either a rape or a sacrifice of this young girl, we can imagine an upheaval on this island where the villages and the clans sort of split up because there's a revolution and people have to leave the island and they embark on their navigation boat and just find this new island that they inhabit. But that the priest in the other island sort of sent their warriors to try to take control of it again. This is the island of Reatea in Ta'a, and it's traced in the walls in the gallery. And these are some of the drawings in there, you've seen them. This one right here is Iri, he's the messenger of Taroa, who's the mighty god in Tahitian mythology. And Iri takes the form of a blue shark. This is Ruatupuanui, and it's the sort of mother star from which all the other stars are sort of come about. And this is one of its princes. These are just some drawings I made on Mac, and some of them are in the exhibition. Tere, the goddess of fire, volcanic eruption or celestial god. And this star, which I first made about 3 months ago for an exhibition in Hydra in Greece. And a new version of it is in the exhibition, and it's called Aldebaran. And Aldebaran is part of the constellation of the Taurus, and it's the brightest star in that constellation, and it's the one that early Polynesian navigators used to sail to Hawaii. But ironically enough too, it's the name that the French gave to the first nuclear blast they did on the Tuamotu Islands. And so that motif sort of reverberates throughout the exhibition here. I want to say something about the wall drawings because as you've probably noticed, those sculptures are really heavy and fragile at the same time, and really difficult to sort of move around, and sort of wanted to find a different way of working. And these wall drawings, sort of what came out of those. So when I did this exhibition in Hydra, I just sort of arrived with my suitcase with nothing, and I made 2 wall drawings in 4 days, and that was it. And I just left them on site, and somebody could, whoever was de-installing the show could just paint over them, and that was it. And there was maybe on a sort of completely what's the word? Running on the other direction, after having to deal with shipping issues and breakage and whatnot, that I kind of wanted to try to find a different way of just dealing with these, making objects. So these were some of the drawings there. This is just a Franco Taller painting, and I thought I'd just throw it in there because late at night with Patty, when we were trying to figure out shading and whatever, we're just like, oh yeah, this area just looks like a Franco Taller, or we want to try to go more Rothko here. So this is Caspar David Friedrich, Sea of Ice. Always been fascinated by this painting and how, it's so like this things, just like sheer force of nature, sort of like getting, like spruced up into these peaks. So we're trying to reference that too in the tectonic plates sort of clashing and so that's just an image of that eel when I put it into our. And that's okay. So now it's just sort of a photo album, a family photo album. So this is more fun. That's just my parents in Tahiti, and my makeshift sort of mold making studio in the garage. And that's the eel on its second mold right there. And I thought I'd show you an albino roach. Have you ever seen one? Oh, you eat them. You get into this crazy project that all you think and eat and, is like 24 hours. Like I come home at 2, 3 in the morning and I'm back at the gallery at 11 and I have to say these kids are amazing because, when they start a crazy fight with you in the morning, like a lightsaber fight, you don't know it's going to take an hour, but you get into it and it's not an hour later and you've gone through the whole house and, use your dirty socks on them and everything, and it's really silly, but, you start your day anew and then all of a sudden you can be like, okay, I'm going back to work and I'm, more at ease about it and not sort of like carrying, like, all that stuff that you were being worried about. That's the Tahiti piece, that's on the wall. That was sort of fun to put up, right? People, like whoever was there. Nobody believed it could go on the wall. So basically it's a resin pour, so it's made on the floor flat, and it's really thin. It's no more than maybe half an inch. So it was like about 10 people. Yeah, we just like went around the classes and said, okay, we need like 10 strong, tall people. And we all sort of like lift it up like a pancake slowly, and then we had to like tilt it vertical and just plaster it on the wall and drill it in. But it's one of those things where people are just like, oh no, how am I gonna do it? And it's just a matter of just do it, and that's it. So who's there? Is that Kim? Are you here, Kim? Does anybody recognize themselves? Okay, so just thought I'd show you, in case you weren't sort of stopping by the gallery, I kind of wanted to show you how we were like crazy in there. Oh, this is just tonight. But there's Madison, Master Shader. That's so. We're all over. There's another Master Shader, Kevlon, from Iraq. No, he's from Iran. But he hates it when I say that he's from Iraq. It's crazy. I don't know. Ask me questions maybe. Here's Patty. Yay! Patty is amazing. She helped me figure out this whole painting thing. Because, you always start off with an idea and you're like, okay, I kind of know how to do it. It's a little bit like this or it's a little bit like that. But sometimes you don't really know what it's going to be like until you start doing it. And sometimes you don't even know how to start doing it. So it just helps to just have somebody next to you and you can just be like, oh yeah, just do it like that, and then they'll just put something on the wall, and then you sort of take it from there, and you're like, oh yeah, like I like this area, let's try to push this more, or and we sort of go back and forth like that. So I think it was really super cool to be able to like create this kind of relationship with not only Patty but like a lot of you guys, because somebody would shade something one way and I'll just be like, oh yeah, that's cool, or like let's try to do something different or whatnot. So yeah, that's what it is. So I had to move a bunch of stuff from LA here, including all these tectonic plates and 2 tons of black sand. And I tried to build that hump, and the truck was way too long, and it got stuck in there. But yeah, that was one of those moments where you're like, oh shoot, I left LA at 8 in the morning, I went to pick up the 2 tons of black sand, and of course I had left space in the back of the truck for it, but when I got there, they're like, the 2 tons are just going to tip your truck over, so you had to like unload half of the truck to put the sand in the middle of it, and then I got here, it was like 2 in the afternoon, and I had to return the truck in LA before 6, and and then we got stuck, and I'm just like, oh my god, how's this going to end? And of course, Pat was super cool about it. She called everybody on campus, and the police came. They're super nice. We're talking about it. They're like, oh yeah, that happens all the time. And actually, it does. Like if you go back there and you look at that piece of road there, it's so indented, and people in the administration maybe should put a sign up or something. But I kind of want to end on that. Oh wait, no. And then I found out when we were like lifting the truck up to pull it out of there that the inside tire had this like gigantic gap in it, and I was like, I can't believe I made it up here, and I wasn't like a roadkill or something. So, anyways, it's fun. Thank you. Any questions? Yeah, it's a company called Black Beauty that does it, but a lot of manufacturers make black sand actually. The main, some companies use it. They sell it in soil to put in soil for planting, other uses for it, or sandblasting. So you can buy in different grades. Different companies have different finishes, different colors, and some are really just silica, some are just broken carbon or whatnot. The stuff that I get is called Black Beauty. It's just the best I've found because it's just almost really the same texture of black sand in Tahiti. And then I have a little bit of bottles from there that I kind of use like magic, for the spirit.
Alex, how about the logistics of bringing back the casts from Tahiti?
So it helps to be resourceful, right, when you're an artist. So yeah, like I have a really good friend who's the checking agent in Tahiti. So whenever like the last time I brought all these molds back to New York, I had like 7 oversized boxes that were overweight, oversized, over everything. And I just called her a couple of days ahead, and I'm like, I'm gonna be on that flight. Can you help me out? And she just sort of waives everything. I just play the artist card. Like, I make molds, rubber and plaster, which they are, but I mean. But I have to say, the New York airports are not as crazy as LA airports, I think. Like the customs, they're not as... Although New York gets really crazy stuff, like, people bring in like carcasses, like animal carcasses in their luggage to like cook with them and things like that. It tastes different, like... Yeah, come on, chicken here and chicken in Europe is not the same. I mean, people smuggle, different wines, cheeses that have fungus on it that you're not supposed to bring in. I mean,
Did your parents move out to Stockton when you were younger or something? And then
Oh, my mom was My mom went to study at Delta College.
Okay.
You're from there?
I'm from Tracy, so.
I never really lived there, and then they sent us all back after I was born. They're like, no, but it's a really crazy story because I really respect my mom. She didn't have any money. She always wanted to study, and that was her dream, to just give herself an education. And she saved all her money when she was younger, and she had a rich girlfriend who was sent to Stockton to study or something, and she kept in touch with her. And I think she was bothering her girlfriend so much, writing to her everything, that I think her girlfriend was like, why don't you just come, stop bothering me. And then she's like, oh yeah, why not? So she bought herself a plane ticket, and she ended up there, and she put herself through college, like being, a living maid for, rich ladies out there. And she did it, and she taught at Davis for a little while. We were born in Stockton, because she befriended these people there, like one of her good friends gave birth to all three of us and two older brothers. Yeah. So yeah, weird. But Kara Walker is from Stockton, the artist Kara Walker, and Chris Isaac. Isaac? Isaac? How do you say it?
I said good stock from Stockton.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I wonder if, because you were a student here years ago, on all your trajectory, studying and then being a working artist in New York, if you had anything, or if students had any questions related to that, like what,
Well, first, I just want to come and talk to me, or just if you have any questions about New York, if you're in New York and you want to find out where the cool galleries or whatever, feel free to email me or something. Alessandra has my contact information. But yeah, I wouldn't say Mesa is really amazing, because when I was here, I didn't do my AA. I just did I took all the art classes that I could, and I did all my GEs in the general class here, and it's so cheap. It's so amazing. It's affordable, and I took more than all the art classes I took. I mean, at the end of my 93 to 97, so the fourth year I was here, I couldn't even take art classes anymore because they weren't offering them. So I had to take independent study with everyone, and which is fun too, because you make it up. But yeah, that's what I did. Is I took all my GEs here, and I got it all done so that when I applied to art school, I had to pay the high tuition. I knew that I was really just paying for art classes with the teachers that I wanted to study with, because I think that's important to, if you're going to be trying to be an artist and not having the money and not knowing what to do after art school, to not have to get into debt, and just because you didn't take English 101 and you still had to write a paper or something, that's, if you're going to transfer and do it on the cheap, that's probably a good way of doing it. And then I mean, I don't know, the faculty were amazing. I'm still talk to them, and still totally respect them. And they're, anybody gets the education that they want or they seek, right? I mean, you can go to the same thing but not get the same thing. So I think it's really about being hungry and just asking people questions, just finding the way to where you want to be, or whatnot. Yeah, I mean, the paper making class was awesome.
Yeah.
We made such a big mess all the time. Do you still teach it? No.
We don't have that curriculum anymore.
Oh no.
I still have a table.
Yeah. Yeah, I held on to my screen for the longest time. I finally had to be like, okay, bye-bye, I don't want big storage for it. But the photo department used to be also big thing. I mean, what really made it cool when I was here, I don't know how it is for you guys, that Richard Liu was the chair at the time, but we were all hanging out together, eating, breathing, and talking about whatever we're doing, and it was a really nice little community to be in, because you could talk to your peers, you could talk to your teachers, you could hang out with them, and you're the support group, and and I think as an artist, I think as anything, like it's always good to have a support group, but especially I think if you're an artist, because you always need a hand with finishing up a drawing or like lifting heavy something and whatnot. So, and I think I'm glad that it's still here. I think because everybody pitched in and it was so cool. Yeah. I hope you guys keep it. I mean, I know it's like California has a big budget cut and everything, but art is important. I mean, I think part of the reason why like this slideshow is a little bit just scattered is also that you never know what sort of like sticks in your brain. Like in terms of like thinking about culture or whatever. Like you see a lot of stuff and then it's never good or bad. But like 10 years later, something might come up and you're like, oh yeah, what was that thing that I saw way back, or what was that movie, or what was that cocktail, or what was what was that thing that Pat made that I ate and it sort of was weird in my mouth, but it was a nice texture and the crab cake loose. Yeah.
When did you really start examining the whole traditional type of thing? I think a lot of times with people that have grown up in two worlds kind of have that turning point, like, wow, I grew up in two worlds, and these are my traditions. When did you kind of experience that, or if you even experienced that?
Like I always feel like I'm doing that, right? And you always, in a weird kind of way, right? You're always becoming an ambassador of something, right? Because it's so much about representation. Because you're always like, okay, I'm not gonna do this because it's maybe too Chinese or it's maybe too whatever, and and you're straddling this line constantly, I think. But what's fun too is, like when I'm here I can say, oh yeah, I have sort of a French accent, I'm kind of French, and that sort of works for me. And then when I'm in France, I'm like, oh, I don't want to talk to them, they're so annoying, and I'm just like the crazy American, and I'm like, yeah, I'm American. You know what I mean? It's like we're sensible people, and we kind of malleable too, and we like, yeah, I think Richard Liu was really important for me in that sense, because I sort of came in and he's collaborating with Robert, who's here, and there was really politically motivated work. I mean, but he was really he's questioning the image of representation in the work, and how do we perpetuate images or stereotypes or whatnot. And it was really cool to just be, just come in and sort of like not really have any thoughts on it, even though I grew up in a territory that was colonized by France and all of that, and having to never really question all these things as a whole, to sort of be confronted to it and to really sort of ask myself these questions as an artist, like, okay, yeah, it is about representation, it is about, you can't just put one thing and something next to it and it doesn't mean anything. It always means something. You're always like, there's always something. So to kind of, it's an awareness, I guess. And I think that's the best anyone can give you about an art education, to sort of like learn to look at things and to dissect them in your head and put them out together and to do that with like everything and anything. And it's really important because kind of like, you get stuck on these things. Did I answer your question? Did I go on?
No, yeah, you kind of did.
This is like when I'm telling you guys, okay, so you shade dark on this line and light on here, and here it's a little bit weird because it's a four-faceted, and you have to like, and I'm like, does it make sense? And you guys are just like, yeah, we can do it. Okay, just leave us alone. Yeah.
Because I wonder if you see yourself kind of as an alchemist in a way, because it's like artists, I think, have this element that is it's not only the aesthetics or the creativity, but when you're doing something like the molds or playing with the resin or, I say playing because sure it's fun, it looks kind of fun.
Yeah, I feel like I'm playing with slime
And
again.
you know, there's kind of that also scientific element of the alchemist or the
Yeah.
chemist experimenting and
It's kind of so loaded, right? But I do have to say, like I like when things happen, like on on the when it cooks like in front of you, or like you're throwing things together, and it kind of just like right there. Sorry, I talk a lot of onomatopoeias. It's really funny. But you know how you like I think the best knowledge is probably cooking. Like my dad does a lot of Chinese cooking. It's all about prep. You cut everything together and then you kind of just throw it in the hot oil and kind of like you let it sort of crystallize. So I think the best pieces I've made sort of like happen a little bit like that, a little bit last minute or a little bit kind of just okay, it's the in flour and just. And I think as a process, it's interesting because I learned it, for myself too, where if I give myself too much time, it's I sort of like fiddle with things too much, and then it's sometimes I lose things because I've sort of like been too mannered about something. Whereas like to have that crunch time when you're like everything's out the door, all the rules are out, and like you're just like throwing things like on the wall and seeing what sticks, or or you try new things, or you just and it works or it doesn't, and then you pick those up and you take it to the next piece and you learn from them.
I just had one quick comment. When you were showing us the mold of the eel, there was like a bucket in the background, and I'm not sure what you make your molds out of, because I don't know how to make them at all.
Oh.
But I'm pretty sure it said calf liver on it, and I was a little disturbed. And I don't know if it was just like a funky name over there in Tahiti for like. Yeah, I was
Do you really
a little
want to know?
disturbed.
This calf liver bucket is probably older than you. I don't know, my parents keep everything, but I was using everything that they had in the house too, and I was like, okay, I need like plastic buckets, and they had that, and I think it's because they love liver.
I was just thinking that, like, I've got a lot to learn about art. I don't know how to make molds, but.
But on that note, though, like I never learned how to make mold until I needed to make it, and I don't think I'm a good mold maker, but it just helps, it's like just to.
It starts with iron.
I'm sorry.
It starts with iron.
Yeah. It's
That's
good,
why they're
like,
so heavy, huh?
with
The pieces.
the molds, because I don't know how to make them.
No,
and I
because they
just-
have so much iron in it.
Anyone in the calf liver industry here?
Did you have to kill the eel, or did you just let it
I just stuck it in the cooler and I just went and showered.
like going crazy with an art team? Like that on the water?
I know, I'm sort of getting tears in my eyes. It's interesting in the way you catch an eel is you you throw your line, and when they eat, you kind of have to get them midway in the water, because otherwise they catch something underneath and they're like you can't get them out. So you have to like pull them out in the middle of the water, and then it kind of just coils on itself. So then you just lift it up like a like a gift wrap bag and put it back. We put some water in it, but I think it probably suffocated from no more oxygen and the cold. That's why I felt like I had to like be nice to it, like after I put it into the ground. But people slaughter like tuna all the time. Think about that when you eat sushi. I don't know. Zoe Leonard. She's this New York artist. She makes sculptures and whatnot. She shows at Paula Cooper. Because somebody always asks about, did you have to kill something and whatnot. she had a good answer about some, one, because she had to like, she had this crazy tree installation, she like uprooted a tree or something and you know whatnot, and for this sculpture. And of course like in art school in New York, you like, you know, you have these kids who are just like, oh, but like, you killed a tree, and like, and like, she's really cool, but she's like, oh, well, you know, but she's like, she believed, and I sort of believed in the silent scream, you know, the silent scream, like letters that's like, don't hit me, don't hit me, I'm alive. Sorry, I don't mean to make fun, but I don't know, you know, I don't think there's any way around sort of being carnivorous, you know.
You took classes here from '93 to '97.
Yeah.
When you were taking your classes here, did you have a goal in mind at the end, or were you just going with a feeling, or was it something you always wanted to pursue?
No, I didn't have a program at all. When I finished high school in Tahiti, I went to Paris because they didn't have a university there, so you had to go to the mainland, and that was France at the time. So I went to Paris for a year, and that's an interesting because growing up in Tahiti, I really didn't have any idea what contemporary art was. So it was the watercolor people who make, you know, watercolors of shells and whatnot. But I shouldn't talk about them that way because I do that now. So. But you know, it was, you know, beach painting, and then there was Gauguin, and I really felt I couldn't really relate to that either. I think Odilon Redon was probably the only, Odilon Redon, that painting of the carnivorous thing, and the Cubist, the Demoiselles d'Avignon were probably the two most contemporary things I had seen in high school there, sort of in textbooks and in high school classes and whatnot. So, but we had fashion on TV every summer. I mean, like on the news, at the newscast, because it was French territory, and I got really excited about fashion and Ray Kawakubo and the Mohamester, people who were deconstructing like the shape and forms. So I was really excited about that, and I thought I wanted to be a fashion designer or something to Paris. And so of course being in Paris, I was like, okay, there's a whole world out here, and you know, and I kind of really wanted to touch everything and sort of catch up, like make videos, like film, like draw, like whatnot. I had my first live drawing class at 17 and a half in Paris, you know. And that kind of like just started to like bubble in my head, and I sort of run out of money there. My brothers were actually studying here, and so they you know, they said, well, you know, come out and you can live with us, and you know, we'll go to this cheap college, Mesa college, and you can take art classes there. And I'm like, okay, why not? You know, let's give it a try. And it was a big culture shock because I didn't know how to drive, and you know, I was in Paris, you can drink at 18, and all of a sudden I felt like you know, I was like back in prison or something. So, you know, because I had to wait until I was 21, and so I had to adjust a lot. But you know, whatever, I did. But no, I mean, that's why I'm saying that it was so so good to be here, because on one hand it was really welcoming, and it sort of gave me a back door to understanding this country too, and the time to sort of like watch crazy TV shows that I had never seen before, you know, and to talk to people who are like, okay, you know, like, what is this that you're trying to do, and to give you the time to think and you know, because out there it's pretty rough. I mean, after school you're kind of like, you know, you have to juggle like your rent, your kids, your paychecks, your car breaking down, your heartaches, and so to have a place here where you know, it's not so expensive and you can sort of afford it, and can kind of let yourself get lost, you know, which is really important, I think. Lose yourself, find yourself again, and yeah, I think what the big motivation for me, you know, like sort of like applying to art school was that I felt like I had sort of, you know, grown out of what the college could give me, which is, I think it's a good thing. Like, you know, like you sort of, you learn and then you move on, and you get, you know, you learn from other teachers, and you sort of grow. Yeah.
Do you think New York is a destination for all artists, or because it's so like
Yeah,
culture?
there's a lot of people there. It's a big pool. I think it's a. I think everybody should sort of like check it out for sure. I don't know if it's a good place to be for everyone. I don't think it's a good place for everyone as a matter of fact. I mean, you have to find. The thing about it too is you have to find a form where you can work, a format in which you can work, but also the audience that is into your work and that you want to cater to. And then when you're there, you also have to figure out how to protect yourself a little bit to give you that space to work, and not be bogged down by all these like daily things like work and whatever, and your galleries telling you to make things on canvas so he can sell them. I think it's the Hollywood of the art world though, in this country, New York, right? It's people go there, they want to make it. It's the industry's there, everybody's there, the dealers are there. It's changing. LA is sort of like it's a cool place to be too. But again, I think it's also a way of like figuring out how you can work and if that can be good for you, because it can also just kill you. Where you're like overwhelmed by rent, overwhelmed by the attitude and the sort of careerism, and then you don't want to do art anymore. But it's sort of like when you're first driving and you get onto the highway and you're like, oh wow, like they're really going fast here, and you have to like,
Catch up.
yeah.
Alex, don't you think it helped though going to school in New York? So that you kind of had a career?
It's true. Yeah, like to go to school where you kind of want to be when you work is kind of it's a good process to sort of like have friends to hang out with, and also to get to meet teachers who are going to be around, and to sort of to build your network basically. Sometimes you never know what can happen. You can meet someone like, and they're like an art curator or whatever, and you're like, oh my god, like I just met the curator from MoMA, but it doesn't mean anything because they meet everybody all the time. But to at least just know that you've met them, you know what they look like, and then 10 years later, they might actually be interested in your work or something because they met you 10 years before, and then 10 years later you're still making your work and you're still around. And for them to be like, okay, yeah, this person is around. They're not just going to disappear, because on the other hand too, it's like a lot of people. When somebody sort of like trusts you into giving you a show or something, it's so much resources that they really invest in you. Not only time and overhead and rent and all that, but it's a whole. What's the word? Machinery, I guess. So it's important for them to also know you're not just going to disappear, right? Because they want to see you around, and they want to see you grow, and hopefully they want to help you grow and see where you're going with your work. I think that works not only for dealers but also curators and collectors, and because it's a discourse at the end, right? You're in the cultural discourse, I guess. It's like you're making something and throwing something on the wall, and people, I guess maybe like writers, taggers, like they just like write things on the wall, and other kids see it, and they're like, oh yeah, they did this there, and so they'll like respond to it in a different wall somewhere else, and you start this conversation. So I think this is the same type of relationship, just on a culture, sort of like more global platform, I guess. Yeah.
Have you shown your work into the
No. And I've actually met somebody from the cabinet of the president over there, just for the fun of it. And I was strongly discouraged from using motifs and elements of anything that looked like a nuclear blast in my work, because France stopped the test in 96, 97, I think. And basically their big economical resource is tourism. And so again, it's interesting, like, right? Because we're talking about like an image making machine, right? So their whole policy is to sell the islands as a tourist place, you know, so that people can come and spend money as a paradise. And I think it, you know, reinforces all this myth about Tahiti, like the savage, and, you know, the Savant savage, and so they really want to bury that that part of their history, or not support it, I guess. And so for them it's like anything that looks like charboiled, you know, something. Which is fine. I mean, it's okay. You know, I just do my work. I just go and make notes. And I mean, the thing too is talking about discourse and, you know, relationship with people. It's like I feel also that I'm not sure if people there understand my work. Clearly, I don't, you know, they don't. I mean, policy comes first, I guess. There, at least for the, you know, for the politics. But I also feel that I don't have local ties with the cultural community there so much anymore. I have friends, but I, you know, don't have friends who are like big artists. The big artists there are not my friends, or the big choreographers there are not my friends. I don't know them. I mean, I enjoy seeing what they're making, but you know, if you're not there, sometimes you kind of like don't have that relationship. So, you know.
Just like, I feel that in a sense that like your work doesn't make me as like a tourist not want to go to the island. If anything, it gives you like a respect for the island and what it's been through. So, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think
see
it's
how they would want to hide that.
Right.
I don't know. You get respect for the rebirth.
One would hope, yeah. I mean,
It's like Tahiti's a phoenix.
exactly. Let's call them and tell them.
The eel's gone, but the phoenix is here.
Thank you. Yeah, let's take it to the air. Let's forget about this nautical myth thing. Go into space.
And the phoenix is from ashes, too, so it works.
Yeah, and I was like thinking, we put red, you know, in that explosion with Patty last night, and I was the whole time thinking, there's a lot of blue in here, like, maybe I should just do a whole new red collection soon or something. Some of these fish look like birds though, right? Like, like a lot of people are like, what's that bird thing? No, it's a fish. Oh, speaking of that, you know how, I don't know, maybe somebody here knows more about it. I don't know if it's an urban myth or something, but somebody told me the story of this woman who got a liver transplant or something, or a heart transplant, and she's like, you know, soccer mom, sort of in her, you know, middle age and whatnot, and then she had this urge after after she got a new heart to surf, and she just like went on and started surfing, and then she realized that the heart that she had was from a surfer kid or something, surfer dude, and so I was always fascinated by that, like how you can, if that at some level could sort of impair, I mean, like it is sort of this other person, The whole bird fish made me think of that. Yeah, what you eat is what you are, and are we gonna turn into plastic?